Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. My name is Kelton Howell.
And I'm Spencer Simpson. In our experience, most Commander games start with someone getting ahead, and then that person gets targeted pretty hard, which can lead to them losing the game, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, so to speak.
Yeah, how ironic is that, right? Yeah, it's because they're scary, and so they become the threat at the table because it's a multiplayer game. All of the opponents gang up on them, and it can be hard to come back from that change in tempo, as it were.
Yeah, getting ahead early, unless you can shut the door on the game and win pretty shortly thereafter, usually puts a pretty huge target on your back, and it can end up being a pretty big detriment to you in the game rather than an advantage, which you would think it might be.
Yeah, and even if your opponents focus you down and you're no longer the threat, they might be biased against you for the rest of the game because you were the threat. And that's also a really bad place to be.
Yeah, you had a turn 1 Soul Ring. You have a Toxrill the Corrosive in your graveyard. Should we read Toxrill the Corrosive?
We missed it last time.
We did.
Well,
people got mad at us.
I don't know if we missed it last time. I might have just not included it.
I mentioned it, and now I think we should read it. So there you go, everybody.
Toxrill the Corrosive is 5 black for a legendary creature slug horror, 7/7. At the beginning of each end step, you put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. Whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token. You can pay blue/black, sacrifice a slug to draw a card.
Oh, the cult is happy.
I wonder if I can get to the point where I could do that all in one breath. I think I've done it enough times. I might be familiar enough with the words that I could do it all in one breath.
I bet you could. I bet we could memorize it. I bet we could memorize it.
Yeah, we're probably pretty close already.
Recite it verbatim. Yeah, but so you play a Toxrill, you reanimate a Toxrill turn 2 or whatever, right? Oof. And someone removes the Toxrill, and then they say, well, you had a Toxrill turn 2, and so now you're the target for this the game.
And I know you can reanimate it. You could reanimate it again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're building you're playing a reanimator deck. I might be speaking from experience here, I think.
I think you are.
It can be, right? It can put a target on your back for the rest of the game, and it can be hard to rebuild, especially if you've used your gas, right? So in the Toxrill example, maybe I played like a Frantic Search, right? Frantic Search is 2 and a blue for an instant, draw 2 cards, and then discard 2 cards, untap up to 3 lands. Sweet. Free spell. I drew 2 cards, discarded 2 cards. One of them was Toxrill, and then I reanimated it, right?
Yeah.
That was 3 cards out of my hand, and now I'm out of gas, right? It gets removed and I'm done. But target's still on my back.
Exactly. So this week we're going to be talking about how you can accrue incremental advantages over the course of a Commander game while not getting too greedy and positioning yourself as the threat.
Yeah, so that's the Toxrill example is an example of something that positions you as a threat. But what are things that position you as a threat in general, right? That's a single example. You usually become the threat because you are gaining some sort of clear or overwhelming advantage, or presenting like Toxrill, or presenting an imminent threat to the table, like Toxrill.
Like Toxrill.
Yeah, and the biggest indicator of that often is your presence on board, or at least it's the most obvious, right? Those creatures are going to kill me, and so I need to kill them first.
Yeah, and everything's face up. When it's on the board, right? So you know exactly what they have. And it's not always creatures, but the less immediate the threat is, the more often it's going to go ignored, right? So some sort of setup piece or even a payoff piece without the enabler is just going to, for the most part, be ignored until it becomes a problem, unless people are really good with their threat assessment and they see it coming.
Yeah, like Panharmonicon, for example. You're playing a Blink deck, right? Yeah. Panharmonicon is a pretty staple piece in those type of decks. It's a 4-mana artifact, and it says, if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So if I just play Panharmonicon and then pass, that's significantly less scary than playing Panharmonicon and then starting to play other stuff, right? It will become an imminent threat at some point, but the turn that I play it, it's not doing anything, and maybe there's other things I should try to deal with.
Yeah, it becomes easier to overlook than just having a board full of creatures. So so having that presence on board can label you as the threat. Another thing that can get you labeled as the threat is doing a lot really fast. So you mentioned the Panharmonicon example. So what if in one turn I'm able to get down a Panharmonicon, I play a Peregrine Drake, which is 4 and a blue for a 2/3 Drake with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you untap up to 5 lands. So let's say I play my Panharmonicon, I play Peregrine Drake, I get to untap lots of lands, and then I dump down an Atraxa Grand Unifier. Do you want to read Atraxa for us?
I'll read Atraxa. Atraxa Grand Unifier is 3 green, white, blue, black for a 7/7 legendary creature Phyrexian Angel, and a deck that I've wanted to build, and it's
yeah, you have this card.
It's such a cool card. I want to build it so badly. It has Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink. And it says, when Atraxa Grand Unifier enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. Jeez, not search.
Oh, that'd be so crazy.
That would be nuts. Reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order.
Yeah, so obviously with Panharmonicon, you would get 2 of these effects, and that's clearly very threatening. It really doesn't take very well-honed threat assessment to know, oh no, we're all in trouble. So that's an example of doing a lot very fast.
Yeah, and because it probably doesn't stop there, right? So you've untapped 10 lands probably because you've gotten 2 Peregrine Drake triggers, and you still have 3 mana left to start doing whatever else you want.
Because
right?
you can float the mana in response to the other trigger being on the stack, right? Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. So you're going to be doing stuff with those cards you drew, and it starts to just get out of control. You start playing other stuff. You can blink your Peregrine Drake, and you've drawn 10 cards at least, or I don't know about at least, but on average probably, right, from your Atraxas hitting. It can get pretty out of control, and so I think that just illustrates the difference between Panharmonicon Past and Panharmonicon Imminent Threat, right? All of a sudden, you do that, and you are the threat at the table, right? If I see someone do that, I'm not saying, okay, cool, what's next? What's player B playing, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's so obvious that you've gained such a big advantage. I'm glad that we read Toxrill already, because I think you have an example of something like this that happened to you.
Yes, so this was a while ago. When I first built my CDC Brood Tyrant deck, and it wasn't a Umori partner deck, which I may be changing it. I was thinking about that recently. We haven't talked about this, but maybe changing it. In any case, pretty early on, I think it was like turn 3, I had ramped on turn 1, so I played a turn 2 Doomed Necromancer, which is a 2 and a black for a 2/2 creature human cleric mercenary, and you can pay a black and tap it and sacrifice it, and you can return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Cool.
So I either discarded or milled a Hoarding Broodlord. Do you want to read Hoarding Broodlord really quick?
Yes. 5 black, black, black. So 8 mana total, 3 black pips. For a 7/6 dragon with Convoke, so creatures that you tap can contribute to paying its mana cost. And flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a card, exile it face down, then shuffle for as long as that card remains exiled. You may play it, and spells you cast from exile have Convoke.
Yeah, so I was able to get a Hoarding Broodlord, and I think I might have even tutored for Entomb or something. And I think it might not have been turn 3 or turn 2 because I had been able to get out Sidisi, so I had some zombies as well, right? But it was turn 3 or 4, right?
Yeah, it was early.
And so I tutored for Entomb. I convoked Entomb with the Hoarding Broodlord. Entomb lets you search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard. That triggers, if it's a creature, that triggers Sidisi, so I get another zombie. And then I could convoke with all of my zombies to cast Toxrill the Corrosive, which I had just entombed into my graveyard. So by turn by turn 4, or early enough that it was really scary, I had Sidisi, some zombies, a Hoarding Broodlord, and a Toxrill the Corrosive.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I think there was even something crazier because I think you somehow copied Hoarding Broodlord. I think that's how you got the other Toxrill out.
Oh, really?
Because then you were able to convoke it with the zombies because you wouldn't have been able to convoke Toxrill from your graveyard.
Oh, sure, potentially.
I think you copied it, which was even... So anyways, 2 Hoarding Broodlords, a Toxrill, and a bunch of zombies, whatever. It was crazy. Immediately you became the threat.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. And I think if I had done that over several turns, I mean Toxtric's scary, right? Yeah. That would have positioned me as a threat anyways, but the fact that I did it all at once, like I was the first person to die that game. Because It was like, oh, Spencer's the problem. And then all my stuff got removed, and I got attacked a bunch, and then the game was over for me.
And I guess that's maybe the difference. Like, yeah, Toxtric's still just as scary, but you don't have Toxtril and 2 Hoarding Broodlords, which are 7/6 flyers at the same time, right? So you might have been able to get Toxtril moved, but keep 2 giant flyers that would have been providing you additional advantage throughout the game.
Yeah, just doing a lot that fast does position you as a threat, right? It's a very clear thing that happens, right? We talked about things on board. So those are all rectangles that are face up and everyone can see them. And so that's clearly presenting you as a threat. And then if you can do a lot of stuff in a turn, like that is a heuristic in people's brains that like, oh, they've got a lot going for them and maybe I should try to deal with them, right?
And I think another facet of that is card advantage, like getting a lot of card advantage very explosively. I think a good example of this kind of explosive card advantage is Kindred Discovery, because it's the kind of card that both pays you off for having things on board and then pays you off as you get more things on board. So you can kind of play it before or after you get those things out. So this is 3 blue for an enchantment. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and whatever creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to draw a card.
Yeah, the fact that it does pay you off for both sides of the coin of either having stuff or then getting stuff is crazy, but I think that's what makes it such a threat, right? Is you're drawing an explosive amount of cards for doing other stuff, like for building your board state as well. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch, right? Of, hey, you have board state, whoa, you drew a bunch of cards.
Yeah. And I think it's important for players to remember that it's not just card advantage and one big explosive burst that is dangerous and that can label someone as a threat. One of your decks that I absolutely love, I think it's built so well. I think it's so cool to play against. It's Marquesa, Dealer of Death, which is actually, why don't you read Marquesa since it is your commander?
Oh, thank you. That warms my heart. It's Marquesa, Dealer of Death is blue, black, red for a 3/4 legendary creature, human rogue. And it says, whenever you commit a crime, you may pay 1 mana, 1 generic mana. If you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. And as a reminder, committing a crime is targeting opponents, anything they control, and or cards in their graveyards.
Yes. So not only does Marquesa reward you for doing something, which is interacting, which is already a thing that's very strong in Commander, not only is it card advantage, it's also card selection on top of that, because you get to look at the top 2 cards of your library, and it puts the other one into your graveyard, which is an extension of your hand. So Marquesa is really cool. And I think the first time I played against it, I did not understand how much of a threat you were because of how much card selection you'd had over the course of the game. And I think that's something that I personally need to keep in mind to look for among players, is knowing how much have they shaped their hand, not just how much have they drawn.
Yeah, what's interesting with that deck is you're not playing Rhystic Study or Kindred Discovery or anything like that that's like refilling your hand. You are just, everything's just cantripping for the most part. And there are ways to draw more, right? But you're just staying with 5 cards in hand for the whole game, and then maybe drawing 1 more on your turn and playing a land, hopefully. So you're kind of just, you don't look particularly threatening, but you've seen 30 cards.
Yeah. That's exactly how it played out. I think you won that game. I think you just had everything because you had been able to filter through that many cards of your deck and assemble just a great hand to not only go for a win, but also protect yourself.
It's one of my favorite decks. I'm concerned I might have to power it up to maybe a high mid because it does interact a lot. And I've tried to...
And it wants to, right? It's paying you off for interacting.
Yeah, and I think it would benefit from like cool free spells and stuff. And I don't think it's good enough to bump up to a high power deck potentially. But I think at a mid power level, it's so much card advantage. And again, like Kindred Discovery, paying you off for making impact, right?
Yeah,
on the board.
Or doing the things that you want to be doing anyway in Commander.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Well, tell us what else can label us as a threat.
So this is one that I put on the list. And I think gaining life is something that can put you as the threat at a table. And I think for many players, it's an indicator that someone is ahead, and it's not always a good indicator necessarily, especially at like higher power games, right?
Yeah.
At higher power games, board state almost doesn't matter if you're trying to win through like combo for the most part, right?
Yeah.
But,
and life totals don't really matter that much.
Yeah, and life totals don't matter. Sorry, that's, board state and life totals, yeah. But I think even at those levels, people bias towards focusing the highest life total player.
Yeah, like, I mean, how many times have you just attacked someone because they had the most life?
Yeah, that's mostly why I attack people, is either they're open to be attacked, or, sorry, you got the most life, I guess, so we'll just swing at you.
And I think it's not just gaining life, but it's manipulating life total. So like draining the table or having a big life total swing, that also positions you as a threat. So playing like a really good gray merchant of Asphodel. So that's 3 black for a 2/4 zombie. When it enters, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to the life lost this waste. That can be a huge swing.
Yeah, every time I played a Great Merchant of Asphodel, first of all, I nearly won the game. So maybe this isn't like a great example because it's just so phenomenal. But on top of that, if I haven't, everyone's been like, well, now we're swinging at you. So if you're doing that before you're ready to like be swung at win. Yeah, right, exactly. Or at least maintain that advantage, you're gonna have that target on your back, and you might get stomped by a Gishath or an Eldrazi or whatever.
Yeah. Definitely. Another card that does very similar thing is Exsanguinate. X black for a sorcerer. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way.
Yep. Same kind of thing, just is really asymmetrically benefiting you a lot. Like gaining life equal to the amount of life lost is crazy. So crazy.
Yeah, it really, one thing that you wrote here that I really like is that it shifts the tone of the table.
Yes.
The next turn feels very different from the turn before after you've played a Gary with Devotion 10.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Wait, we were all just at 20 life, and now the rest of us are at 10 and you're at 50? Like, that's crazy.
There's a very different feeling to the table after that.
Yeah, you become the archenemy very quickly. So hopefully you can close out that remaining 10 life, blink Gary or reanimate Gary or something, and just close it out. And the other thing, much like draining the table, would be pinging the table repeatedly. So things like Perforos, God of the Forge. Perforos is 3 and a red for a 6/5 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible, which is insane. And it says as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a creature. Even more insane. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Perforos deals 2 damage to each opponent. So I don't know that I've ever viewed not being a creature as a disadvantage. Like the fact that it's an indestructible enchantment makes it so much harder to interact with.
Yeah.
But point being, it's one of the best ping abilities, right? And I actually, admittedly, hadn't played a lot with Perforos until recently. I built a friend of mine an Othari deck, and Othari creates rebels when you attack equal to the number of experience counters, and it gets experience counters when you attack. And he attacked with 2 experience counters and had an Anointed Procession, which doubles your your tokens.
So that's 8 damage.
8 damage, but also Othari. He played Othari that turn too, so it was 10 damage.
Wow.
Plus whatever damage he was going to deal from like dealing combat damage. And 10 damage to each player too.
Yeah, that's 30 total damage. Just for playing creatures, which is what your deck is wanting to do. Anyways.
Yeah, exactly. Again, kind of a gray merchant effect, and you're not gaining the life, but it's really hurting other players.
Quick.
Yeah.
Another one is Blood Artist, classic card that becomes a problem. This is 1 and a black for a 0/1 vampire. Whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life. And you gain 1 life. I was listening to the Command Zones episode on upgrading the Endless Punishment deck from Duskmourn. I am so excited for that deck, by the way. I haven't been this excited for like a new commander inside of a precon for a long time. It's really, really cool. Valgavoth is
the Valgavoth art is so
cool.
The
art is so cool.
Yeah, very cool.
They were talking about the deck and how there's a lot of these ping effects. It's just like consistently doing this chip damage every turn for an opponent. And Rachel Weeks mentioned these effects as what's doing that style effects where, you know, it's your turn and you draw a card or you play a creature, whatever you do. And they're like, okay, you take 1 damage. And you're like, what's doing that? Why do I keep losing life? I've lost 5 life this way. What is doing that? And it's just so obnoxious in a way that it's always coming up to your attention, and so you're going to target it. That person and that thing is going to become a threat to you, and you're going to target it because it's so persistent.
Yeah, it's interesting that something like Rhystic Study obviously is very powerful, or like something that's letting you draw a card whenever something happens, but someone's not like losing life. You're not telling them to downtick their life total each time. You're saying, cool, I draw a card. Cool, do you pay 1, I draw a card, right? Which you're still reminding them of something, but it's not as visceral of a reminder, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things when I play Shieldred. I feel so bad when I'm like, you lose 2 life. You lose 2 life. You lose 2 life. Because I don't want to say that because it draws so much attention to me and so much attention to Shieldred, but you got to remind them that's how you win.
Yeah. So. The alternative, I guess, is like reaching over and down-ticking their life each time.
Quietly
trying to sneak your finger over to the life counter.
Hello, I'm going to try that next time I play Shieldred.
Yeah, I mean, these things, what's happening, what's doing that, it draws your attention to them, but sometimes like they also slip under the radar because it's not doing enough. It's like more of a mosquito than like a punch to the face. Yeah. And I think sometimes they're most threatening when life totals start getting low. Then people are like, oh, wait, what's doing that? Like, I'm going to die.
What I think is so funny is when I can't board wipe because I'm at 10 life and there's a blood artist on board.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't get rid of the creatures because I die if I do it.
Yeah, you need two removal spells. Honestly, that's the best feeling, is having that insurance of having Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat or something on board.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
And then the last thing here is just ramping a lot. It's especially with things like Soul Ring, right? Not just like consistently ramping turn over turn, but playing like a Soul Ring or a Jeweled Lotus or a Mana Vault or whatever, things that are explosively gaining you mana, and especially things that are repeatable. Like Soul Ring. I think Soul Ring's like the #1 example of something that puts a target on your back, right?
You just always get focused or attacks when you play the turn 1 Soul Ring. Like, you play the turn 1 Soul Ring, comes time for the first person to send in an attack, it's obviously coming at you.
Yeah. Because you played a turn 1 Soul Ring, and now you've had 4 additional mana than the rest of us. Whereas, like, we talked about a turn 2, like, and you said you'd found a study at one point, and we couldn't find it for this episode. We apologize. Of the command zone, they'd gone through and found all of the games where someone started with a Soul Ring, and all of the games where someone had a Soul Ring turn 2, and like the win rate of the turn 2 Soul Ring was significantly higher. Again, anecdotal. I can't remember. We can't remember where we saw it.
If anyone remembers the episode, link it in the comments so that people can watch it. But I think their hypothesis, if I recall the episode correctly, was that it can be beneficial to slow roll a turn 1 Soul Ring and just play it on turn 2. And because it's still going to give you most of the advantage, you're only giving up 2 mana, right? And on turn 1, you likely don't even have a follow-up play. So you're only wasting 1 mana. But the amount that it decreases your threat level to the rest of the table is beneficial enough to increase your win percentage. I think that was like the hypothesis.
Yeah, I wonder what that curve looks like. I wonder if like on the margin it's the biggest drop from 1 to 2. Part of me thinks that the biggest drop is probably from 2 to 3.
Yeah.
Like, because
maybe.
Because turn 2 still feels like pretty early. Like if someone turned 2 Soul Rings, and even if someone else has done a turn 1 Soul Ring, I'm pretty like dubious of that player and what they're able to do on their next turns. Whereas like turn 3 or 4, right?
Like, oh, like you drew Soul Ring.
Soul Ring, and you're like, oh, okay, like sure. I don't know. It's very good, and it can put a target on your back though, right?
Yeah, I don't know that you need to sandbag a turn 1 Soul Ring, but it just be aware that it does put a target on your back.
Yeah, again couldn't put a target on your back for the rest of the game. Like even though Soul Ring goes away, feel like, hey, you had a turn 1 Soul Ring, right? And not just Soul Ring, right? Like there's other types of explosive ramp. This is one that you put on our list that we might disagree on how much people evaluate as a threat, though I don't think we disagree on how much people should evaluate it as a threat. And it's Seaborn Muse.
Yeah, that's 3 green for a 2/4 spirit, and it has the ability untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. So you're getting to untap your lands every turn, not just on your turn. This is one that I do frequently target. If somebody has played a Seedborn Muse, I know what that means. I know that they now have 4 times as much mana as they did before. And if they have enough cards in hand, I know that that's going to become a problem very, very quickly.
Yeah, if they have instant speed effects or they have like activated abilities, then it is going to get out of hand. Like this is one of my favorite things to play in Tasigur because he has an activated ability.
Yeah,
and I can activate it.
It's
every
wild
turn.
in Tasigur.
It's so cool. It's so cool.
So this is one that I think we both agree, even though it's something that I target pretty heavily, just because I've played against it a lot, especially in Tasigur. I know how bad it is in Tasigur. I think we both agree that people don't target this one enough, at least from the play groups that we've seen. People don't see Seedborn Muse as a big enough threat sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about how to like fly under the radar a little bit too, of not be perceived as a threat. And Seedborn Muse, I think, is one of those that sometimes does that, even though it shouldn't, right? Yeah. Because it's giving you really, really like 4 times the mana a turn cycle, and if you can utilize it, that's a huge, huge advantage.
Yep.
Yeah. The idea being anything that's on board and in your face is going to position you as a threat, right? Anything that's causing problems for other players, very obviously, right? Again, the pingers, sometimes there are little mosquitoes flying around, and that's not causing so much of a problem. Some enablers, if you're not really popping off yet, aren't much of a problem. But as soon as things start to go down on board and you're getting a very clear advantage, it's going to position you as a threat.
So does that mean that we just shouldn't be putting things on board? We shouldn't do anything that would make us a threat? Nope.
No. No, yeah. Those are all my favorite things to do, is to like pop off on my turn and do cool stuff. Like, we're not saying you shouldn't be doing that, but we want to make sure you're doing it at the right time. And so I don't know if you have heard of the concept of window theory. I had never heard of window theory as a term. I'd heard of windows because I watched some CDH content and people talk about finding their window, right? I watched a little episode from Playing with Power, maybe we'll link it below, about window theory, which is something that's talked about typically in like 60-card Magic or even other card games. But basically, there are 3 kind of deck archetypes in window theory, and there's aggro, mid-range, and control. And each type of deck has a window in which it wants to win, and I'm laughing because when I was writing these down, I'll tell you each of them, but when I was writing them down, so aggro wants to win early, right? Yep. Mid-range wants to win in the mid-game, and control, when I was writing these down, I meant to write late. They win in the late game, but I just typed win. And so Kelton, when he was reviewing our script, added a comment that was like, you meant to say late, right? Because if so, that's an amazing Freudian slip. So clearly, I just love playing control, and all control does is win.
That's all control is trying to do, is just win. But the idea here is that each deck does have advantages over another type of deck. It's a rock, paper, scissors format, right? Yeah. Which I love. I love strategy games that have a rock, paper, scissors format. I think it's really fun.
The idea of the rock, paper, scissors is aggro can win before control can stop them, right? And then mid-range gets beaten by control because control can keep them from gaining their mid-range advantage. And then mid-range can beat aggro because they can outlast the early game and then have a bigger advantage in the mid game. So
exactly. But we don't really have clear archetypes like that in Commander, and especially in casual.
Yeah. Yeah, in CDH, there are some analogs to this, but I would argue mostly in casual, a lot of what gets played is mid-range. Like, even some of the more aggressive decks, like, you're still somewhat playing a mid-range strategy because the analog would be like turbo, and that's not really happening in casual, right?
Yeah, and it's because it's a multiplayer format, and it is more casual, and those factors can just muddy the water for like these types of windows in Commander. So what does impact your window in Commander are instead things like how many cards does each player have? Like if players all still have hands full of cards, maybe it's not the right time to try and pop off yet. But if everyone only has 1 to 2 cards in hand, then your chances are a lot better.
Yeah, maybe it's your time. Maybe it's your window. Yeah. Some other things would be like if they have untapped mana, right? What does their board state look like? Would they be wanting to board wipe on their turn after you fill the board with creatures?
Yeah.
And these type of questions, what they really answer is how likely is someone able and willing to interact with me when I try to pop off, right?
Yeah, because when you do pop off, you really want to be able to maintain your advantage through interaction, or at least protect yourself in some way. So this can be in the form of something like Teferi's Protection, which is 2 and a white for an instant until your next turn. Your life total can't change, and you gain protection from everything, and all permanents you control phase out, and then you exile Teferi's Protection. So you can protect this advantage that you've built on board and even in hand by just phasing out and waiting for the next turn to go for the win.
Yeah, or like Heroic Intervention is 1 and a green for an instant. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible on another turn. So if someone does decide, well, it's worth losing my board state to wipe the board and kind of reset things because Kelson just generated a huge advantage and he casts Heroic Intervention, then he's able to get through that interaction and keep his advantage that he's built. And one of my favorites would be like Moldervine Reclamation, which is kind of a different angle to be able to get through interaction. Do you want to read Moldervine Reclamation?
Yeah, it's 3 black, green for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and you draw a card. So I really like that you added this example because it's not protecting your advantage. It is replacing your advantage with a different advantage. So you are able to maintain an advantage through the interaction.
Yeah. I mean, it's... And this is kind of what some people would call like a win more card, right? Sometimes, except that this is like, to me, like an alternate form of protection that also gains you advantage when you're not just like losing your board state, right? Like you're
even if someone's not board wiping, you're still maybe drawing a card every turn by having creatures die in combat.
Yeah, just like attacking into somebody, and if not, you're getting through for chip damage, which is really cool. So if you think you're able to maintain your advantage through that type of interaction from opponents, then you've probably found your window to go nuts and be unpunished doing that, right?
Yeah.
But before that, you probably, if you haven't found that window, right, you probably shouldn't be going for it.
Yeah, you should sit back and set up. And sometimes that means taking a little more damage. You need to get comfortable with this. It's okay. You have 40 life. And just choose to interact only when necessary. And just continue to look for that open window.
Yeah, and some decks are just naturally better at this. Like control decks, right?
Yeah, or win decks.
Or win decks, right? Decks that just win. Control decks, they're synonymous, Kelson. Yeah. Come on. And actually, I kind of have a hot take about this, and I think that everybody at some point should try playing some sort of control strategy, because I do think it really helps you to learn a couple things. One of them being, like you just said, being comfortable taking damage, right? Being comfortable just like letting your life total go down in order to accrue advantage in other ways. And also helps you learn how to like wait for windows and maybe not play stuff in your hand because you have a board wipe. So you're just waiting for everyone else to just tap out and play their creatures so you can wipe the board and then play your creature next, right? I think it teaches you some really good habits that you can actually take into other archetypes, right? And we just said that you're mostly playing mid-range and casual. There's obviously a range, but it's not as like distinct as it would be in other formats.
Well, I think you can do this in other formats. It was a huge level up moment for me when I really played my first good control deck in Limited. And it felt really cool. And I learned a lot of good lessons that just carried over to Commander. It was the first few times I played a control deck in Limited, it was scary letting my life get down to like 5 or less life and then stabilizing, coming back and winning a game. And like now I'm fully comfortable with that. I don't really mind because I know that that's the strategy. I know that that's what I'm trying to do. And I know that I have my window later in the game. And so that is, I think, a lesson that I learned in Limited that I brought over to Commander.
Yeah. And maybe we should do an episode of this because now all of a sudden I want to jump on the talking about control decks and how that's not as easy as just like being slammed in the face all the time. Like you have to like be judicious about it. But like it's I think it's difficult. And don't get me wrong, the other archetypes are also difficult to pilot. Like aggro, notoriously very difficult to pilot, especially in other strategies, or in other formats. In any case, you're sitting back and setting up, right? And while you're doing that, right, sitting back doesn't mean doing nothing, right? It means that you actually are actively still setting up for when you will have a window and be able to capitalize on that.
Yeah, you're setting up so that you can position yourself as the threat. So you're doing things like ramping or drawing cards or getting smaller threats on the board, not your big game-ending threats.
Yeah, this is the stuff that we like to do, right? So to circle back, we're not saying don't do it. We're just saying do it a little bit less. Do it incrementally, right? We're
Until you have a window.
Yes, exactly. We're trying to lull people into a false sense of security and then snap, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're still drawing cards, but maybe you're drawing 1 to 2 additional cards a turn, right? Or you're still ramping, but maybe you're ramping once or twice in the early turns, but you're not, playing Soul Ring into Mana Vault into whatever, right? You're not just having really explosive ramp.
Yeah. We can even jump back to the life gain example. You can accrue advantage and weather attacks by making sure that you're at a healthy life total, like 30-ish, but you might be less of a target than if you jump to 50 or 100 life and you're clearly have some sort of inevitability or that you're going to win the game.
Yeah, this is one that really stuck out to me in that I think often when we do gain life in Commander, it's like, oh, I want to gain so much life, I want to be untouchable, right? But sometimes what that does is that just says to everyone else, okay, stop attacking each other, we're just all going to attack Spencer, right?
Yeah. Yeah, or try and keep everything of his off the board until we can find a way to get him down to a manageable life total.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas, I played a limited game the other day where I think I gained 30 life, but my life total was like still, it was like 18 or 20, which is like full life, right? In that game. But it could have also been like 12. I could have taken more attacks and then just kept gaining that life to stay at like a manageable life total that gives people hope, right? It makes them not worry about you as much.
Yeah. And it's less of a problem in limited as it is in Commander, but staying at that healthy life total is really important. So some of the other cards that fit in the sit back stage are some cards that can be considered like win more cards. And specifically, I think we see a lot of enchantments that fit into this category. Mm-hmm. So something like Parallel Lives, which is 3 and a green for an enchantment. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens on the battlefield instead.
Yep, and then the other one here is Anointed Procession. You just read Parallel Lives, right? Because they do the same thing.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, the other one here is Anointed Procession, which is 3 and a white for an enchantment. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead.
That's so funny. Is it literally the exact same text?
I don't know if it's the exact same text. I need to read. I'm looking at an old version of...
If an effect would... one says create, one says put.
I
think one says onto the battlefield, one says... just under your control?
No, I think the newest printing of Parallel Lives is the exact same text.
Is it the exact same? Okay.
Yeah. Should we read them at the same time? I'll read Parallel Lives, you read Anointed Procession.
Okay. Ready, set,
go.
If an
effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control.
There's got to be a lag. That's not working at all.
Oh, sorry, everybody. What a terrible audio experience.
I love it. Anyways, these advantage pieces can often get ignored until it's too late. We used Panharmonicon as an example earlier, where if you just Panharmonicon and pass and it's not doing anything, then sometimes it can slip under the radar. And I think the same thing can happen with these, though these are very powerful effects that people know how crazy they can get. But you're hoping that just by parallelized pass, like nobody's going to touch it until you can do something with it.
Yeah, kind of like Seedborn Muse. These are types of things that should draw more attention than they do, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes they don't, right? And if someone else has a creature on board that's affecting life totals, these will get missed. Like, people will not pay attention to these as much as they should, right?
Yeah.
So the next thing here is that while sitting back, right, isn't just doing nothing, right? You're setting up, right? But while you're setting up, you aren't just playing solitaire, right? So what you need to assume is that people have built their decks such that they can interact when they need to, and more importantly, capitalize on the windows they're given.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the main takeaways from this episode as we've been discussing it, is it's not just about finding your windows. It's about finding your windows and knowing that your opponents are not only able to interact with your window, but find their own windows.
Yes.
And so it's just this idea of being aware of the fact that your opponents hopefully have built their decks in a way that's just as capable as yours.
Right. Like, if I found my window and I tap out and play everything that's going to win me the game on my next turn or whatever, and then Kelton at my end step says, cool, Swords to Plowshares, my turn, and then just goes off, right, with whatever he needs to. Like, again, you just have to assume that people have built their decks such that they can interact with you, right? I think one thing we think about in Limited often is like you have to make them have it, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes a fair assumption in Commander, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, Kelton, is they have it. Like,
yeah, because there's 3 of them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They're 3 times likely that. Now, again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that part of finding your window is keeping track of like, and not intangibles because they're known values, but keeping track of things like cards in hand, right? That is such a relevant statistic that will affect your success in trying to go for it during your turn. You have to be aware of that.
And I think it's the kind of thing that easily gets lost in the shuffle, more so than creatures on board, super visible, lands on board, super visible.
Yes.
But cards in hand, players, I'm not going to say intentionally, but players like collapse their hand into a single, it looks like one card, or they're sitting with their hands in their lap or something like that. And it's not as visible to know how many cards each player has in their hand. And then when you ask everyone how many cards they have in their hand, they assume you have a Jessica's Will. But it is something that you need to keep track of as you're looking for your window.
Yeah, and I would argue, to take it even one step further, like we can go back to the Marquesa example, like be aware of people who've seen a bunch of cards.
Yes.
Right? Like if someone has 7 cards in hand, but they just discarded 13 cards, right?
Yeah.
Then
they have card draw, they have interaction, they have a threat,
and they have more interaction, right?
Yeah,
they're ready. So it's something that I think gets again overlooked a lot. And we're playing casual Commander, right? Like, but we should be playing to win still, right? We're playing to build
to our
casually,
outs. Play competitively.
Yes, exactly. I think we should co-opt that mantra. And again, credit to Sheldon Menery, just like
absolutely
a perfect quote. I think it has become my philosophy. Like in Commander, I'm trying the build casually part. I'm trying to be significantly better at. I think, but also it's play competitively, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So rather than tapping out, right, and saying I found my window, I'm playing everything, right, or even before you found your window, right, because we're not even talking about finding your window. We're talking about on your turns, right, rather than tapping out to say 4 mana Anointed Procession, right, and you're tapped out. You're probably better off saying, okay, 3 mana, play something, and I have mana up for Swords to Plowshares, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of playing your big bads on curve all the time and just hoping that they stick, if you're trying to really find your window, play your next biggest thing, keep up some mana, and either use it for interaction or for like some other instant speed effect. And that's honestly like part of the reason we love instant speed effects is because it can make you more flexible. You can be more like Bruce Lee, move like water, right?
Yeah, I love it. It just allows you to incrementally gain that advantage that you need to be able to win at the end of the game and still keep your wits about you and keep your options open.
Yeah. You get an advantage inch by inch rather than taking greedy steps, right? You're instead of going a foot at a time, you're moving, half a foot at a time or 9 inches at a time, but you have ways to stop people from advancing even further, right? From just taking even bigger, greedier steps.
Absolutely. So sitting back and setting up can require a lot of patience and discipline.
Yep.
But you need to not get too greedy. That being said, sometimes you can get away with it, right? And that's okay. Commander's a casual format. It's very swingy. Sometimes your opponents don't have it. They might all have 7 cards in hand and not have a way to interact with the thing that you're about to do and win. But sometimes you're gonna get punished for taking a greedy play, and you're gonna be forced to sit back.
Yeah, and when you are, it's good to have learned how to sit back and play from that position. Even like it's good to learn to play from that position voluntarily, so that when you're forced to be in that position, you are not uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Even though it is uncomfortable, right? It's inherently very uncomfortable to not have the pieces that you need, but you can sit back, you can kind of be in the shadows a little bit and let other people duke it out and then interact when it matters, right? Interact meaningfully and then hopefully claw yourself back into a game.
Yep, absolutely. I had this experience where I was playing Satya Aetherflux Genius I'll go ahead and read him. I think he's pretty sweet. 1 blue, red, white for a 3/5 human artificer with menace, haste, and whenever he attacks, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of up to one other target non-token creature you control. You get 2 energy counters, and at the beginning of the next end step, you sacrifice that token unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value. I play this deck pretty aggressively. It's very creature oriented. It's not an energy deck. It's a creature deck. So the goal is play an early creature, play Satya, make copies of those early creatures, and just really get in there while the getting's good. Well, people don't like to be hit with a bunch of copies of creatures, and so I was in a game where Satya got removed, and now all of a sudden he costs 6 mana, and I don't remember why, but I was pretty limited on mana, and most of my board was gone at that point, and I had to make a decision. I think I was playing against you. I was playing against your Marquesa deck, and
it was Tasker, and I had a removal.
Oh, it was Tasker.
And I could keep getting it. Yeah,
you could loop the removal. Okay, so the board state, if I recall, was you could keep returning that removal to your hand. And so if I just played Tasker again, if I could have just played Satya again, he would have just immediately gotten removed again.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. That didn't make a lot of sense. And so knowing that I was forced to sit back, I was able to look at the game very differently and say, okay, I know the cards in my hand. I know what Satya is trying to do. I know what my opponents are all trying to do right now. How do I slowly inch my way into a position where I have a chance at winning the game later? Because I can't do it now. And so it changed the types of creatures that I was playing and the way that I was setting up so that when my window was open, when Spencer was tapped out and he didn't have removal up anymore, then I could play Satya, get my copy of a creature, and have a big turn and potentially take out a player or try and win the game. And I think I played that game very differently after that.
Yeah, and because you were forced to. And do you think, okay, some introspection time, do you think that has affected how you play Satya or just in general your decks, how you pilot your decks?
Yes, definitely in general how I pilot my decks. One thing I like about Satya, like I have built Satya and I play Satya to be very aggressive. Mm-hmm. Like it's a celebration of cheap creatures that have a big board presence, and I like that. I think that's really fun. So I think I still don't have much of a problem just running out Satya and knowing that he may get removed, but the next time I get out Satya, there is a very different play pattern where I'm like, okay, I'm going to make sure I have a big enough threat out that's stuck on the board so that I can play Satya and immediately get a lot of impact with that one. But I do think, like, in general, it has changed how I look at my decks, where I'm saying, okay, you know, what is everyone else doing? Where are they at in that threat level? And where is my window? It just got me thinking about windows a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something to keep in mind with Windows as well. And just how you sit back and set up and how you play in general is the play pattern of your commander, right? Yeah. Like, and Satya is very aggressive. And I like that you mentioned that, like, first time running out Satya. If Satya gets removed, I'm waiting maybe till I have up 8 mana or whatever, and hopefully I have like a counter spell or I have some protection, right? Yeah. So that I can, or I already have a big enough threat on board that if Satya gets removed, it's not a problem.
And
right?
That's the thing is that Satya has haste, and so if I have a big threat that was able to stick for a turn, then I can immediately play Satya and get a second copy of that big threat.
Yeah, that's really good. That haste is so good. Hasty commanders that have attack triggers, yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Satya would not be nearly as fun to build or play if he did not have haste.
No, I mentioned Othari earlier. I noticed the same thing for the Othari deck that I built for my buddy.
Totally.
Yeah, it's just something to keep in mind, the play pattern in your commander. In any case, if you can learn to sit back and find your windows and then deal with threats as they come, right? Not just like hit the first thing that's you know, a big bad hitting the board, you will win more commander games. We have no statistics to back this up, but we know in our bones that this is the case.
Yeah, and I think we can take a lot of analogs from other formats where we know how important windows are, and those things can apply to commanders, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. We're so happy to have you tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. If you haven't liked and subscribed, thank you for watching until this point. Please do so. We feel that support, and we just appreciate it so much. We have loved doing this channel, love the support. Please check us out on thecommanderpod.com. We have a way you can email us from there. you could find us on YouTube. That's where you are right now. We are on YouTube and Spotify, and you'll see us next week. We release weekly, so please keep us in mind. Try to hit the subscribe bell button. That's a thing, right? You hit a bell and it lets you know when we post.
What does the bell do?
I don't know. It lets you know when we post. Just do it. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, remember to always pay the one.